The waves crashed hard against the base of the cliffs of Moher on the west coast of Ireland, creating a deafening symphony that accompanied the cutting wind of the Atlantic. From above, a crowd of tourists looked, some with curiosity and others with nervousness, towards a point in the distance where a man, trapped on a ledge of another cliff, several meters from the edge, waved his arms in despair and let out screams that were lost in the roar of the ocean. But among the crowd, there was someone that no one seemed to notice. A beautiful young woman with a disheveled appearance and a stealthy walk that moved between the shadows and the murmurs. It is at the edge of the abyss where we discover who we are, and often the hand that holds us is that of someone who has already learned to face the falls. Elizabeth Montano Lopez, despite her shabby and worn clothing, had a beauty that seemed to shine through the dust and salt that covered her face. Her golden locks fell untidily to her hips, framing intense, mysterious eyes that seemed to capture everything she looked at. No one knew where she had come from, but there she was, observing the scene with a vivacity she did not share with the other spectators, while an internal monologue crossed her mind. My strength does not come from what I possess, but from what I am not afraid to lose. From the edge of the cliff, Elizabeth made out the figure of that man trapped on a narrow ledge, tall, dressed in high-end hiking clothes, but evidently out of his element. The murmurs around them spoke of how he had slipped when trying to get too close to the edge for a photo, and had fallen on that ledge, a dangerously inaccessible point. Some tourists whispered that he was Sean Fitzgerald Sullivan, a millionaire recently arrived from Dublin, while others argued that the ledge, in addition to being narrow and slippery, seemed unstable, so much so that a safe anchorage would be difficult. Furthermore, their location was on a convex curve of the cliff, further complicating access from above, and making any attempt at rope rescue put the lives of the rescuers at risk. Elizabeth said nothing, but her gaze reflected a keener understanding of the situation. Unlike those around her, who seemed fascinated by the drama from a safe distance, she picked up on the growing panic in Sean's gestures and the obvious risk that the ledge could give way at any moment. It is on the edge, where the safe ends and the uncertain begins, that we discover what truly sustains us. Without a second thought and taking advantage of the fact that everyone present was absorbed in the spectacle, he glided towards the area of rental paragliders that were lined up and ready for tourists. But Elizabeth was not just another visitor, much less someone who would stop to ask for permission. Her mind worked fast, every detail of the scene in her head. Her hands moved deftly as she unrolled one of the paragliders, the bustle and fascination of the crowd providing the perfect distraction. She adjusted the harness on her shoulders and tightened the ropes, her fingers moving with the precision of someone who, despite her old clothes, knew exactly what she was doing. Those who hold on to what is safe will never see beyond what they know. True freedom resides in those who are not afraid to jump when others only watch. With one last glance at the crowd, she launched herself from the edge. The paraglider unfolded in the air, catching the wind in her face and gently lifting her up. A murmur of wonder ran through the crowd as they noticed the silhouette of that young woman throwing herself from the precipice, but it was too late to stop her. Elizabeth calculated her flight, letting herself be carried by the air currents as she maneuvered with ease. The proximity to the edge of the cliffs made the wind turbulent, but she seemed to know every turn, every current that propelled her toward the man trapped on the ledge. True greatness is not measured by what you achieve, but by what you are willing to risk when no one expects you to. When she finally reached him, Elizabeth made a precise turn on the paraglider and landed elegantly on the narrow ledge of the cliff. Sean Fitzgerald O'Sullivan, CEO of a prominent marine technology exploration company in Dublin, stared at her with wide eyes, not believing what he was seeing. He, accustomed to braving the depths of the ocean from the safety of his laboratories, would never have imagined finding himself trapped on a ledge at the mercy of the wind and waves. much less that an unknown young woman, disheveled but determined, would be his unexpected savior. Fate builds unsuspected bridges between worlds that rarely cross. "Who are you?" "Yeah, sure, I want to get out of here, but how do you plan on doing that?" "Trust me," Elizabeth replied without explanation. "I'll secure you to the paraglider, but you need to follow every instruction." "Have you ever flown?" On a paraglider?" "No, never." "Perfect," she said, suppressing a smile. "Then you won't try to help." With precision, Elizabeth secured the extra harness around Sean's torso, checking each buckle with firm hands. He was breathing heavily, his eyes darting from the ledge to the cliffs, a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Seeing his condition, she looked into his eyes, trying to instill some calm in him. "Listen, Mr. Fitzgerald Sullivan," she said, using his full name with a formality that almost sounded like a joke. "This is going to be quick. You have to trust me. Don't think. Just jump when I tell you to. Understood?" Shauna felt speechless as she looked at the determination in Elizabeth's eyes. "All right. 3, 2, 1. They both jumped off the ledge, the wind enveloping them in a whirlwind of cold air. Elizabeth adjusted the paraglider, skillfully maneuvering to stabilize the flight. Beside her, Sean exclaimed something, his voice somewhere between astonishment and tension. Although she noticed that the initial fear in his gestures was beginning to give way to a kind of unexpected excitement, little by little his rigid expression transformed into a nervous smile. Elizabeth watched him out of the corner of her eye, satisfied that he was beginning to relax and enjoy the experience, even if only a little. Courage is not always the absence of fear. Sometimes it is smiling in the middle of it. As they advanced over the abyss, he looked at his rescuer, in disbelief at what they had just done together. "I don't know how you did it," Sean said, catching his breath. "I just know that you are incredible. Who are you, really?" Elizabeth only gave him an amused look. "The tramp who just saved you, millionaire. Now don't move, or this will end much worse." With each maneuver, Elizabeth controlled the paraglider, slowly lowering the wing towards the starting point. The crowd watched them return in amazement, and as soon as they landed, they burst into applause. Some tourists tried to get closer with cell phones in hand, recording every second of the unusual rescue. Elizabeth helped Sean unbuckle himself, and he, still staggering, held her hand with a respect he had not shown before. Two souls who meet in the abyss come back transformed, each one a mirror of the other at the crossroads of destiny. "I have no words to thank you." Sean's voice sounded genuine, a humility uncommon in someone accustomed to receiving help without asking for it. Elizabeth shrugged, downplaying her feat as she handed the paraglider back to the equipment manager. When she returned to her side, Sean tried to touch her arm, stopping her for a second. "Will I see you again?" he asked, a mixture of fascination and curiosity in his gaze. "It depends," Elizabeth replied with a mischievous smile. "If you learn not to get so close to the edge, maybe you won't need me to save you again." And with a last farewell glance, Elizabeth walked away through the crowd, her golden hair waving in the wind. Joan tried to follow her, with the impetus of someone who doesn't want to let go of a fleeting vision that promises to stay in her memory. She watched the figure of the young vagabond walk away, her golden hair lost in the breeze. As he struggled to get away from the crowd surrounding him, however, the first responders, attentive to his condition, instantly intercepted him, insisting on monitoring his vital signs. "Sir, you can't leave without a checkup," they told him firmly, taking him by the arm. Sean looked over his shoulders, resisting at every step, his gaze fixed on Elizabeth's silhouette, now almost a shadow in the distance. Life is still beautiful despite all the losses along the way, he thinks internally, as he seems to resign himself to the fact that the homeless woman has slipped away from his life forever. That same night, as the sky turned purple and shadows began to envelop the city, Sean drove through the streets of Galway aboard his Aston Martin DB11, a classic model in British green that stood out in the Irish landscape. Every corner, every street, and every nook he walked through plunged him deeper into the obsession of finding her, of meeting those enigmatic and deep eyes that had seen him beyond his fortune and status. But the emptiness persisted. Elizabeth was nowhere to be found, and he didn't even know her name. Frustrated, he finally parked the car near a tavern in the city center and approached a couple of passers-by, trying to describe that young woman with golden hair and worn clothes. But they all looked at him with confusion or disbelief. No one had seen anyone like that. No one knew about her. Aimlessly, Sean began to walk, letting his wandering steps guide him through the night, searching for answers in the wind and the shadows. He looked up at the starry sky and murmured a prayer, almost a plea. If fate ever has compassion on those who search beyond themselves, allow my eyes to see her once more. As he walked, lost in his thoughts and the emotions the day had left him with, he noticed an ancient stone bridge spanning the river Corrib. Its sturdy structure and deep shadows blended with the glow of the streetlights, and Sean, almost without thinking, headed towards it. If it were her, where would she take shelter on a night like this? He thought, as his pace became slower, more restrained. Sneaking under the bridge, he glimpsed a beautiful female figure sitting in the darkness, her hair in disarray, falling in golden locks around her face to her hips. Elizabeth, though far from spotless, radiated an unusual beauty. Leaning in a corner, she seemed immersed in her thoughts, completely oblivious to the distant bustle of the city. Sean stopped just a few feet away, his heart pounding as he held his breath, aware of the intensity of that moment. She looked up slowly, and their eyes met once again, but this time in deep silence. It was a connection that transcended words, embracing in a single instant the day lived, and the certainty that something new, inevitable, was about to begin. Two souls do not need to speak to understand each other. In silence, they find the echo of their own longing. Sean took a step forward, his voice resonating softly but confidently. I came to say thank you and ask your name. Elizabeth observed him closely, with that mysterious serenity that seemed to surround her, and after a brief pause, her beautiful, youthful face lit up with a mischievous smile. It was a pleasure to help you. It is not every day that one experiences the adrenaline of borrowing a paraglider to save a millionaire stuck in a ravine. They both laughed together, the echo of their laughter getting lost in the murmur of the river and the night wind, as if they were accomplices of a secret revealed only in that corner of the city. There are encounters that break the barriers of time and place, where the soul recognizes in the other the echo of its own journey. Sean cleared his throat, looking at her intently. What's your name? She looked at him, still amused but wary, and answered with unexpected firmness. Elizabeth Montano Lopez. He nodded, pronouncing her name as if he had memorized it, as if each syllable was a thread that tied them more deeply. Elizabeth said in a deep, determined tone, I came for you. She raised an eyebrow, half bewildered and half curious. What are you saying? Hey, I'm not going anywhere with you. Sean kept his gaze fixed on her, his eyes revealing an unwavering determination. Come with me. Let's go to my car. I'll get you out of here. Elizabeth looked at him with a mix of defiance and curiosity, her lips forming a slight smile as she crossed her arms. Give me a logical reason for me to go with a stranger, she replied, holding his gaze firmly, as if they were both measuring the weight of her words. Without losing his cool, he moved a little closer, and with a wisdom that seemed to go beyond words, he answered, Let me save you, Elizabeth. I didn't object to you saving me today. Now let me save you. And please don't object. Follow me and don't ask any more questions." He extended his hand towards her, their gazes meeting with an undeniable intensity. After a moment of hesitation, Elizabeth stood up, holding onto his hand, and together they walked in silence to the car, moving towards the mystery of what destiny had in store for them. There are encounters that don't seek answers. They only accompany the silence of those who have crossed an abyss. Sean drove the Aston Martin in silence, the murmur of the engine caressing the stillness of the night. In the passenger seat, young Elizabeth looked out the window, the lights of Galway reflected in her eyes and in her indecipherable expression. Despite the circumstances, there was something about her that never ceased to surprise him, that serenity that seemed to come from a place as deep as it was unfathomable. In a moment of stillness, Sean broke the silence, letting his words float softly in the air between them. "Sometimes fate takes us to unknown depths, just so we can see who we are when we're on the edge," he said, with a serenity that reflected a learning gained over time. "Maybe tonight will take you to new paths, but you already carried with you the mettle of someone who doesn't give up." Elizabeth smiled slightly as if something in those words reminded her of herself. "And you?" she asked, watching him out of the corner of her eye. "Do you already know who you are when you're on the edge?" Sean kept his eyes on the road, a slight smile suggesting that perhaps he didn't yet have all the answers. Shortly after, they arrived at the imposing Moher Sanctuary Hotel, which projected a warm, contemporary glow, creating a stark contrast to the life Elizabeth was accustomed to. Without saying anything, Sean stopped the car, got out, and walked around the vehicle until he reached the passenger door, which he opened naturally. "Tonight you will sleep in the best suite in this hotel," he announced simply. Elizabeth, still surprised, looked at him with narrowed eyes, her tone regaining its usual spark. "Do you think the ceiling of a suite is going to make me forget the sky I saw from that paraglider?" Sean laughed, unable to hide his admiration for that answer, her free spirit and her resistance to being easily impressed. At that moment, a universal wisdom seemed to color the scene. Some hearts find their home in the open skies, others in the elegance of a shelter, but both long only for the freedom to be what they are. Instantly, the hotel staff, dressed in impeccable suits, rushed to attend to them, although some glances strayed towards the beautiful Elizabeth, observing her disheveled appearance with discreet curiosity. Upon seeing those judging eyes, Elizabeth lowered her gaze, feeling the weight of the inquisitive glances. There are souls who, even in rags, carry dignity as their greatest luxury. For his part, Sean turned to her and offered her a warm smile. "I don't think they see me as good company for an important client," Elizabeth murmured, with an almost indifferent smile. Sean reacted in a calm and firm tone, addressing the hotel staff. "The worth of a human being is not in the fabric that covers her body, but in the strength that envelops her soul. I assure you that she wears a dignity that surpasses all appearances." Elizabeth looked up in surprise. Her expression changed from reserve to confidence, feeling how her words disarmed the prejudiced glances of those around her. After crossing the lobby and dealing with the curious and judgmental glances of the hotel staff, Sean approached the reception and, with a naturalness that made clear his custom in places of such prestige, asked for 2 suites, one for him and one for Elizabeth. He signed the documents without delay, and they were soon led to the elevator. As they ascended, the soft sound of ambient music filled the space, although the silence between them seemed more full of meaning than any melody. He who is master of himself wears the humblest of clothes with a bearing that luxury never reaches. Sean turned to her as they exited the elevator, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Follow me, Elizabeth," he said in a tone that hinted at surprise. "I have a special surprise for you." Elizabeth watched him with a mix of skepticism and curiosity, but followed him down the hall to a luxury boutique located inside the hotel. The display cases displayed exquisite dresses, clothing, and accessories that sparkled under the soft, warm light. As they entered, the air was filled with soft notes of perfumes and the texture of velvet and satin in clothing. Some need gold to feel valuable, others simply carry their own shine. Sean gestured to the garments and, looking at her seriously but without losing his kindness, said, "Choose whatever you want, Elizabeth. But remember one thing. You will always outshine any garment with your undeniable beauty." Elizabeth looked at him, trying not to burst out laughing at his obvious gallantry. With a mischievous smile, she replied, "So, should I walk out of here in the same clothes and a sign that says, 'Beauty without ornaments'?" Her tone was sarcastic, but there was a glint in her eyes that revealed her gratitude. Sean watched her with respect and fascination, not trying to add anything to her statement, just feeling lucky to be in that moment and in that place. There was an unspoken pact in their silence, a mutual recognition that even if the day was over, the eternal was just beginning. After a brief tour of the boutique, Elizabeth stopped at the perfume section. Her eyes lit up and her lips curved into a slight smile, as if she had discovered a familiar corner in the middle of the unknown. Sean, who was watching her from a prudent distance, noticed this flash of recognition and approached, intrigued. "What fragrance do you like?" he asked softly. "Although, from your expression, I imagine these scents are new to you." Elizabeth glanced at him from the corner of her eye, an amused spark igniting in her gaze. "You're wrong, I know this perfectly," he replied in an almost nostalgic tone, reaching for a delicate bottle. "I would love to be imbued with Sanchez's jasmine scent again. The jasmine scent is what reminded me of who I was, or at least who I used to be." Sean fell silent, surprised. Something in that answer, in the contrast between the wandering girl and his intimate knowledge of such a sophisticated and expensive fragrance, generated in him a mixture of surprise and curiosity. However, he chose not to delve into her past. His intuition told him that there was a time for every question, and in this one it was enough to recognize that there was much more to Elizabeth than what appearances showed. Not all faces show the stories they carry in their souls. Some secrets are revealed only in the fragrance of an instant. Finally, Sean took the bottle and handed it to the saleswoman to prepare it. Without adding any comment in their gestures, there was an implicit understanding, as if a language was beginning to form between them, in which words were becoming increasingly unnecessary. Elizabeth walked around the boutique. She chose each item of clothing with a curious ease, as if it were familiar to her. Sean, observing her from a respectful distance, finally approached with the finest shoes and accessories he could find, insisting on completing the selection. "There is nothing that can beat your extraordinary beauty," Sean told her, while offering her a box with elegant shoes and a series of delicate accessories, such as makeup, handbags, and jewelry. "This entire boutique is dull before your natural beauty. But let me at least treat with a detail the beautiful young woman who saved my life with the most courageous act my eyes have ever seen." Elizabeth gave him a look with the spark of irony that was so characteristic of her. "A detail, you say? It seems more like you're trying to disguise me so that it won't be obvious that I'm the vagabond on a rescue mission. Are you planning to put me in a display case? Now I hope you don't have any plans to put the high-end rescuer on display somewhere." Sean laughed, caught between surprise and admiration, as she continued to inspect the garments at a leisurely pace. Each piece she touched, revealing the confidence of someone who, despite appearances, knew perfectly well who she was. After completing the purchase, Sean said to the beautiful young woman, "Go to your suite, Elizabeth." It's time to show the world what an incredible woman you are. I'll pick you up as soon as you're ready to go down to the restaurant for dinner. I'll give you the most beautiful evening of your life. Thank you again for everything you did for me. The evening of my life? As long as it doesn't include another paragliding rescue? Not at this hour, Elizabeth replied, laughing. They both said goodbye as they entered their respective suites, but each one, internally, was left thinking about the other with a strange smile. After taking a bath that seemed almost like a ritual, the young woman finished getting ready in front of the mirror. With her hair wrapped in a cloth, on her perfect skin, with delicate features, she applied sophisticated makeup and carefully slid the deep red lipstick over her mouth, revealing the perfect contrast on her very white skin. Then she removed the cloth, letting her golden curls fall, framing her thin face with elegance. Over her slender, delicate, and attractive figure, she let fall an exclusive red designer dress, fitted at her narrow waist, with a daring neckline that made her look even more beautiful. Elizabeth fastened a diamond necklace around her neck, and finally placed some ruby earrings that seemed to shine under the soft light of the suite, brushed her long curly hair, and finally she took the bottle of jasmine perfume and soaked in its scent, closing her eyes for a moment. As she looked at herself in the mirror, wonderfully beautiful as a catwalk model, in her high heels, a soft smile appeared on her lips, whispering to herself. She had almost forgotten who she was and who I am. And then a thought crossed her mind unexpectedly. The essence of someone does not change because of the luxury that surrounds them, but because of the truth they carry within. At that moment, a knock on the door brought her out of her thoughts. When she opened it, she found Sean, who looked at her with surprise and admiration engraved on his face. He looked her up and down, unable to hide the impact. "Take a turn, Elizabeth," he said, in an enraptured tone. The young woman, funny, so slender and beautiful, turned slowly, letting the red dress and her golden curls accompany the movement with elegance. Sean watched her, and after a brief silence, he commented almost breathlessly, "Your beauty is absolutely stunning, Elizabeth. You look like a catwalk girl in the perfect slenderness of your figure." Elizabeth, surprised but maintaining her usual spark, sketched a smile, and they both exchanged a look that said much more than words. "So from a homeless rescuer to a catwalk girl? Well, Sean, have you thought about being a writer?" "Sure. You could make me the protagonist, although I'm afraid I wouldn't follow your script. As an unusual heroine, you already know that I will always break all the rules," she said hilariously with her youthful face made up, more beautiful than ever. Then, Sean, in his exclusive suit, offered her an even greater compliment. "It seems that the shine of each diamond and the red of each ruby are nothing more than reflections of your own essence, Elizabeth." Instantly, the young and beautiful girl replied, with her usual amused irony, "Diamond shine and ruby red? Don't exaggerate, Sean. She's just a vagabond in a ball gown." Sean smiled at the brilliance of her witticisms, always ready to reply in his own style, and continued, "Elizabeth, you are so dazzling that every jewel seems to have stopped shining when seeing you, because you are the real jewel tonight." "Dazzling?" "I don't doubt it, my dear Sean. There was a huge mirror in my suite. But now you will be in trouble. You will have to run for some sunglasses so as not to be blinded," the young woman added with a spectacular smile, while Sean did not stop smiling in admiration of her greatness in every sense. Minutes later, the slender girl entered the prestigious hotel restaurant on the arm of the millionaire. The brilliance that lies in the soul does not need jewels to reveal itself. In the purity of its essence, the spirit is its own treasure. The elegant couple entered the restaurant with a presence that was impossible to ignore. The spectacular beauty of young Elizabeth in her red dress on her perfect silhouette, together with the distinguished figure of Sean in his exclusive suit, captured the attention of everyone in the place. As they walked towards their table, eyes were inevitably drawn to Elizabeth, who with a confident and subtle walk seemed to attract the light with each step. When they sat down, a formal-looking waiter approached, handing them the menu with a discreet but reverent gesture. Sean opened it naturally and began to read the options, evidently prepared to guide Elizabeth through the haute cuisine dishes. However, as he began to describe a typical dish of the region, Elizabeth, with a mischievous smile, interrupted him. "Oh, of course, côte de veau grillée," she said, pronouncing each syllable in impeccable French, with unexpected elegance as she looked at the menu. "And I also see risotto al tartufo, and here, tagliolini al nero di seppia. Oh, and of course the famous pâté de foie gras." Sean looked at her in astonishment, trying to process what he had just heard. And after a few seconds of silence, between astonishment and amusement, he could not help but argue. How can a vagabond be so beautiful, master a paraglider, and also be multilingual? Is there something that does not fit in this puzzle? Elizabeth, amused by his reaction, returned a playful look and with a sly smile answered, "Well, Sean, it's that I am like those old luxury books. Some do not dare to open them, but those who do find stories they never imagined." Sean let out a deep laugh, delighted by her wit, while the waiter, who was watching the unusual interaction out of the corner of his eye, patiently awaited his choice of dishes. Without breaking the charm of the moment, Sean closed the menu and looked at the waiter to order. But Elizabeth shrewdly interrupted him. "We will have a couple of côtes de veau grillées, and to accompany, a chardonnay." As the waiter left, Elizabeth and Sean shared a knowing look, both aware of his curiosity and the mystery she elegantly kept intact. There are souls that pass through life like shooting stars, touching others with their light without ever letting themselves be caught. The conversation flowed with a mix of charm and mystery. Sean, intrigued by every word and gesture of Elizabeth, finally blurted out the question that had been hovering in his mind since he had met her. "I need to know your story," he said, looking at her with a mix of curiosity and admiration. Elizabeth let out a soft laugh, full of irony and mystery. "Are you in a hurry to unravel the mystery of a vagabond's busy schedule?" she replied, amused. He, undeterred by her playful tone, looked deeply at her, letting his sincerity be reflected in each word. "Please, Elizabeth, sometimes in life you find something that you simply feel you must know, as if by discovering it you would understand something you have always sought." Her voice trembled slightly with emotion. "And so it is with you. I feel that knowing your truth is finding a part of mine." She looked at him for a moment, surprised and touched by his honesty. After a thoughtful pause, she nodded, looking off into the distance as if she were re-encountering her own story. Sometimes the paths that seem to lead us to loss actually lead us to discover what we would never have found in the comfort of what we know. "Maybe not everything is as it seems," she murmured. "I learned that, when we let go of our possessions, the only thing left is our true identity." "Sean, this is my story. I was stripped of everything I had, except myself." Sean looked at her intently, silently, understanding that behind each word, there was an intense past. Gently and without looking away, he whispered, "Let me share your truths. If it is you who lives on the cliff, I will go for you to save you without hesitation." Elizabeth looked at him, her eyes shining with an intensity that said more than 1,000 words. Something opened in their hearts, and in that shared silence they understood that, although they came from different worlds, there was something undeniable that united them. Perhaps life does not take us where we expect, but where our soul silently wishes to be. "I was born in Cantabria, in the north of Spain. I spent my childhood between the mountains and the sea, so I was always adventurous. My father, Martin Montano, was my only close relative. My mother died when I was born, and he devoted himself to raising me and to his work. He managed a considerable fortune in the shipbuilding business, a family business that my grandfather had inherited to him and to which he dedicated his entire life. But he was never one of those cold magnates. On the contrary, he was generous and taught me that true wealth is in what we give, not in what we possess. Elizabeth paused as if with her words, she saw her past take shape before her. She continued in a darker tone. Adolescence was a beautiful stage. I learned to paraglide, and my father supported me in all my extreme sports. Although she was terrified of seeing me jump off the cliffs of my land, it was a fairly free and peaceful life, until her brother, my uncle Joaquin, showed up. He was her partner in the company, but he was also someone I always distrusted. I suppose it was a feeling, but I couldn't imagine how right she was. Sean watched her, absorbed in each word, noticing the emotional weight in her voice. She looked into his eyes with determination, as if in that contact she renewed the courage to continue. When the authorities intervened, personal and family accounts were blocked, and all our assets were frozen. Joaquin, being the only partner without charges, took over the administration of the company. He claimed that it was necessary to maintain operations to avoid further losses and managed to maintain restricted operational access to manage contracts and cover basic expenses. Meanwhile, without money or resources to defend my father, any attempt to prove his innocence was practically impossible. In the midst of my despair, one afternoon, I found myself looking at the horizon and saw my paraglider, the one that had been my companion of freedom for years. I decided to sell what I loved most to try to help my father. I used every penny to hire legal help and search for proof of his innocence. But before I could move forward, Joaquin found out about my intention and gave me an ultimatum. If I did not abandon my efforts to help my father and leave, he would make sure I would never see him again. That was how I was left without family, without resources, and with no other option than to get as far away as I could, at least to know or imagine my father alive. Sean, moved and indignant to the last fiber, responded in a haughty tone. "Let's go immediately to rest. Tomorrow we will leave first thing in the morning for Spain. I have to rescue the most beautiful girl my eyes have ever seen, who is trapped on her own cliff. And I swear that I will return both her father and her beautiful paraglider." With tears in her eyes, the young and beautiful girl's shield broke for the first time. She stood up from her seat and hugged him with all her heart, without saying a word. Sometimes, the strongest hearts also need to rest in the embrace of another, to remember that they do not always have to carry everything alone. The next morning, Spain welcomed them. The plane landed without incident at the Bilbao airport, the closest point to Cantabria that had adequate facilities to receive the private aircraft that Sean had arranged. When the doors opened, a fresh northern wind welcomed them. In each return, we carry the scars of the battles we fought, and it is in that dignity where the true triumph of memory resides. Elizabeth descended first, going down the stairs with an elegance and grace that highlighted her slender and powerful figure. She wore an apple green designer suit, which accentuated her golden hair, and dark glasses that, together with her luxury handbag and high heels, gave her the image of an empress who seemed to be returning to a forgotten throne. Sometimes, the true power of a queen lies not in the luxury that surrounds her, but in the dignity with which she faces the return to her own depths. Sean followed her, observing her with a discreet smile. When they both reached the dance floor, he approached her and, maintaining a firm posture, spoke to her in a low and determined tone. "We have arrived at your land, my beautiful Elizabeth. I have reserved a villa in Cantabria where we will settle. We will take a taxi there now. Once we are settled, we will go out to buy a car. I have the best lawyers in Cantabria aware of the case. Last night, my legal team in Dublin coordinated the necessary contacts. This will only be the beginning to unravel the whole truth. That I promise you." Elizabeth looked at him, slowly lowering the sunglasses on her youthful and smooth face to meet his gaze. "Wow, Sean. I had no idea that rescuing millionaires by paragliding was such a profitable business, with luxury packages included," she said with her usual hilarious irony. But then she changed her tone and deepened her answer. "Seriously, thank you, Sean. Not everyone has the courage to face the abysses of another. Whatever we find on this path, I no longer feel like I'm alone." A couple of hours later, Elizabeth and Sean got out of the taxi in front of the villa he had booked in Cantabria. The two of them stood in ecstasy for a few moments, contemplating the spacious, perfectly kept gardens, surrounded by cypresses and old rose bushes that seemed to give the villa an air of mystery and sophistication. The true beauty of a place lies not in its grandeur, but in the peace it is capable of granting to the soul that contemplates it. After crossing the entrance and taking a short rest, each one in their luxurious room changed their clothes. She was dressed in an elegant yellow suit that fit her slender figure, and they headed towards the dealership where Sean had planned to buy a car. Once there, as they walked around the place, Sean turned to Elizabeth with an interested smile. "Anything you want to recommend to me?" he asked, intending to surprise her, as if it were for yourself. Elizabeth looked at him with a spark in her eyes, because he had no idea how much she knew about luxury cars. She walked towards one of the most prominent models in the showroom and, with a confident voice, began to point out options. "For you, I love the Mercedes-Benz G-Class, a robust classic with character. It's perfect for someone who knows what they want. Now, this other one. A Porsche Cayenne Turbo GT has unbeatable performance thanks to its 640 horsepower twin-turbo V8 engine. Perfect for someone with a taste for power, but without a doubt," she added, guiding her gaze towards an even more special model. "This Aston Martin DBX 707 is an automotive gem with the perfect balance between style and functionality. Ideal for someone with a high-class soul and an adventurous spirit who likes to get caught in ravines just for the risk of taking a perfect photo from the edge of a dangerous cliff." The young and beautiful girl appeared with amused laughter. Sean looked at her impressed, between laughs, unable to contain a smile of surprise and admiration. "Let's say no more then." "This is," she exclaimed decisively. "Let me talk to the sales executive. Come with me." In front of the executive, Sean spoke with a determination that left no room for doubt. "This beautiful young lady you see here will drive the Aston Martin DBX 707, he said, with a smile as he noticed Elizabeth's face full of astonishment. "Prepare the documents so that you can put it in her name immediately." Elizabeth was stunned, feeling a mixture of disbelief and excitement. She tried to contain her response but couldn't help but say in her usual humorous tone, "An Aston Martin? Sean, are you buying me a car or inviting me to a new life out of a movie?" But there was a sincere gleam of gratitude in her eyes, and after a pause she accepted the gift with a warm smile, while giving him a hug from the most authentic part of her heart. There are gifts that are not meant to be possessed, but shared, because some gestures have the power to change lives, and in the act of giving, they reveal a hidden part of ourselves. Elizabeth accelerated confidently in her beautiful 20s, her hand firmly gripping the steering wheel of the Aston Martin, while her golden curls waved in the wind that came through the half-open window. The winding road of Cantabria seemed made for her skill and knowledge of the place, and each turn was a silent declaration that this territory belonged, in some way, to her indomitable spirit. Sean, sitting next to her, observed the mixture of concentration and freedom on her face. At times it seemed as if Elizabeth were not only driving a car, but regaining a part of herself with each mile driven. Finally, they stopped in front of a building. They both got out of the car and walked toward the entrance. Upon entering the door, they were greeted by a secretary who, after greeting them, led them into a wood-walled office decorated with shelves full of law books, treatises, and framed diplomas. Behind the desk was the lawyer, a gray-haired, neat man with a serious expression that softened slightly as he saw them enter. When we decide to fight for what is right, we not only seek justice in the world, but also in ourselves, rediscovering who we are with each step forward. Sean O'Sullivan and Elizabeth Montano, correct? He greeted them, standing to shake their hands. I am Mr. Armando Rosado. Welcome, and let me tell you that we are aware of the general aspects of your case, thanks to the information provided by your legal team in Dublin, Mr. O'Sullivan. Thank you, Mr. O'Sullivan. We look forward to your assistance, Sean replied in Spanish, his voice firm but cordial, marked by an English accent that brought a peculiar touch to the office. Of course, replied Armando, indicating that they should take a seat in front of his desk. Elizabeth settled herself, her gaze fixed on the lawyer. Seeing the determination in her eyes, Armando continued. I understand that there are serious accusations against your father, Elizabeth. According to our first analysis, certain financial and legal movements of your uncle Joaquin raise important suspicions. This does not guarantee anything yet, but we are convinced that we have a good starting point to prove your father's innocence. Elizabeth took a deep breath, and although her eyes reflected the tension of someone who has carried a silenced truth, she maintained her composure. So, Mr. Armando, what can we do to start? She asked calmly, but with the intensity of someone who is ready to face any truth that is coming. The lawyer nodded, admiring the fortitude of his young client. We will do a thorough review of the frozen assets and the documents that supported the accusations. In addition, we need to reconstruct the company records to look for patterns or transfers that suggest misappropriation of funds. Elizabeth nodded, and her voice reflected a mix of hope and determination. Counselor, we know that justice is found only when we are willing to question everything around us, even those things so overwhelming that we take for granted. Elizabeth and Sean stood up, ready to leave the office. With a last look of gratitude and determination, she nodded in response to what the lawyer had said, knowing that finally someone was willing to help her recover everything her family had lost. Justice is not simply a result. It is the echo of the brave fight of those who do not accept to give in to lies. The day of the new partial trial arrived with palpable tension in the room. 2 months had passed since Elizabeth, Sean, and lawyer Armando Rosado began their tireless work to gather the evidence that could now change their father's fate. The hearing was being held in a court in Cantabria. Elizabeth, dressed in blue with a sober elegance that reflected her determination, glanced sideways at Sean, who accompanied her from the front row, with a smile of unwavering support. When the judge asked for the entrance of the new witness, a murmur spread among the attendees. He was a former employee of the family business, an accountant named Manuel Ortega, who had worked for years under Joaquin's direction. Mr. Ortega, can you declare what you know about the financial transactions that led to the prosecution of the accused? Asked the lawyer Rosado, with a firm but empathetic voice. The witness swallowed before answering, but his voice resonated clearly in the room. Yes. What I know is that the embezzlement of funds was orchestrated by Joaquin Montano. During the nights when I worked late, I witnessed him altering records and transferring money to accounts outside the country. A murmur intensified, and the judge called for silence. Attention immediately turned to the defense attorney. I request that Joaquin Montano take the stand, Rosado ordered, looking confidently at Elizabeth's uncle, who advanced with heavy steps and a tense expression. The first questions were methodical, but a few incisive retorts from Rosado were enough for Joaquin to begin to doubt his answers. The contradiction became evident when he tried to justify transfers that now, thanks to Ortega's testimony and the new documents, he had no way of explaining. A cold sweat beaded on his forehead, while the murmurs of the audience became unbearable. Finally, after an exchange of direct and dead-end questions, Joaquin looked up, visibly defeated, and said in a murmur that resonated like thunder in the courtroom, "Yes, I did. I did. Satisfied? I was the one who manipulated the accounts and blamed my brother to save myself." The confession was received with a mixture of surprise and relief among those present. Minutes later, Martin Montano was declared innocent. Elizabeth put a hand to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears before jumping up and running to her father, who, after so long, welcomed her with a hug that encapsulated all the days of struggle and hope. While the tears of some attendees filled the room, Elizabeth, still hugging her father, whispered, "I promised you, Dad. I promised you." There are moments in life that restore faith in what seemed lost, and it is in those moments where the truth triumphs and the soul reconciles with its own history. Elizabeth, with tears of emotion running down her face and still holding her father, turned to Sean, who was observing the scene with bright eyes and a serene smile. She walked towards him, feeling how each step she took was loaded with meaning and gratitude. When their eyes met, Elizabeth stopped in front of him and with a shaky but firm voice said, "Sean, there are not enough words to thank you for what you have done for me. Not only did you help me rescue my father, but you rescued me. You showed me that even in the darkest moments, there are angels who guide us back to where we belong." Without thinking, she hugged him tightly, a gesture that overflowed with all emotions, gratitude and the deep connection that had been born between them on their unexpected journey. Sean closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the hug, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. Elizabeth gently pulled away and looked at her father with a mixture of joy and pride. "Dad, without this wonderful man named Sean, I would still be lost in the abyss, just like you." Sometimes fate takes us down uncertain paths, only to remind us that true wealth lies in the bonds we forge when we least expect it. A month later, the cliffs of Moher in Ireland looked more imposing than ever, dressed in the golden light of the sunset that dyed the Atlantic with sparkling reflections. The waves roared in their eternal symphony. A select crowd waited with restrained emotion. They had witnessed an unusual and emotional spectacle, the wedding of Elizabeth Montano and Sean Fitzgerald O'Sullivan, an event that had made two very different worlds collide to form a new one. Elizabeth, with her face so youthful, radiant, and ethereal, wore a white wedding dress that fitted her slender figure with unmatched elegance. The delicately embroidered lace fabric danced in the wind, while a long layer of tulle floated like an ethereal trail behind her. Her golden curls were gathered in a natural way, with small jasmine flowers intertwined that highlighted her beauty and recalled the perfume that so marked her. Her eyes, now more serene and luminous than ever, reflected the certainty of a love that had been born between the wind and the abyss. A few meters away from her, Sean watched her from the ledge where they had promised eternal love minutes before. He wore an elegant dark suit with an ivory-colored vest, and his gaze full of emotion did not leave Elizabeth's figure as she prepared for a moment that symbolized everything they had lived together. With a mischievous smile, Elizabeth looked at Sean and raised an eyebrow, as if challenging him to follow her. Without further ado, she ran a few steps and launched herself into the void with the paraglider, her dress fluttering like a wing of freedom. The crowd held their breath as the white paraglider unfurled, and she rose into the air, floating above the waves that roared in approval. Without wasting a second, Sean put on his own harness and jumped after her on his paraglider. His movements were firm and sure, and in no time he reached her in the air. At her side, flying together over the abyss, he reached out and took Elizabeth's hand, intertwining their fingers as the current carried them gently in a dance that seemed suspended in time. "Ready to fly with me forever," she whispered to him, her voice carried by the wind, but clear enough for him to hear. Sean smiled, leaning towards her until their foreheads touched, and answered in a tone full of promise. "Always, Elizabeth, with you, to the end of the horizon." And so, flying over the cliffs where it had all begun, intertwined in the air, and with the Atlantic as a witness, they sealed a new chapter that promised to be as adventurous and unexpected as their first meeting. Because there are loves that not only defy the rules of life, but fly above them, carrying with them the echo of those who knew how to love without fear of falling. Dear listener, today I raise a thought of gratitude because you have the good fortune of being a witness to this story. And although material things may be abundant or scarce, you possess the richness of the heart, a gift that many long for and few find. If you want to help the furry ones on the street, it's very easy. You just have to subscribe, like it, and share this story on WhatsApp. Leave me your name in the comments to send you a personalized greeting.